All right, guys, welcome back to the High Man podcast. Good to be back. How are we doing today, Pete?
Yeah, pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. So today it is Friday, the 9th of December, currently 11:43 a.m., episode 17.
17, yeah.
17, yes. Did an episode 2 days ago, so back on it straight away. It's going to be a shorter episode today, I think. But do you want to kind of talk about what we're going to cover today, Pete? Like the topic?
Yeah, so the topic for today I thought of was whether happiness is the most important thing for people to pursue, how much of a priority people should put it as, whether there's more important things in life that will maybe lead to a more meaningful life and fulfilling life, which doesn't necessarily mean a happy one. We can talk about the crossover and the differences between that. But yeah, that's the general gist of the episode.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting episode. I don't know if we're going to be able to come to like a conclusion on what is the best option to take. Because it's such a complex question, I think.
Mhm.
But we'll definitely try and get some good discussion about it.
Yeah.
So should we dive right in?
Yeah. So I thought I'd start, you know, initially this when I think about this question, I'm skeptical about the idea of people saying that you should aim for happiness in life. Um, there's a few reasons for this. But firstly, we kind of need to talk about what happiness is and or what we mean by happiness, because the pursuit of happiness will mean different things for different people in different contexts. So if someone were to say pursue as much happiness as you can right now, then that equates to hedonism, simply the pursuit of maximal pleasure in the short term. But over the long term, that's you're not going to be happy over the long term pursuing that, because there's obviously the adaptation. You adapt to the higher stimulus, and then you need more to make you even get back to baseline. It kind of links into dopamine, which we'll speak more about in a future episode. But basically, you're going to be pushing yourself below baseline every time you search for the next high. So that pursuit of happiness directly in the short term obviously isn't a good thing. Any initial thoughts you want to say about
Uh, I, Happiness, it seems to be like the easy option that everyone thinks their life should like revolve around. Like that's like the kind of like the highest um state of being that everyone kind of wants to make their life become. And I think initially, like especially when you're a kid, I think it's something that should be kind of not necessarily taught to kids, but it should kind of be the thing that kids think about what life is. Because when you're a child, you're quite innocent, and like if you're kind of taught that suffering is going to be a massive part of your future, like um future years, it can become like a bit scary. I
that?
mean, there is a benefit in like how society kind of captures young people's minds and tells them, although life's going to have some difficulties, happiness is the thing that's going to bring you joy, and like that's the thing that your life should be about. Because when you're a kid, that's well, in my opinion, when you're a kid, like happiness should be like the main focus. Because like in order to learn and like become like a more developed person, you need to be able to do that from like a good baseline. And I think happiness is a good place to do that from, rather than like suffering. Although there is some benefits to the suffering, but when it comes to like a child, I think it's probably better for happiness to be the main focus. But as you get older, I think that should change.
Yeah. To play devil's advocate with that, do you think encouraging happiness as a child could breed some sort of naivety, and kind of set them up to be too attached to this idea of happiness going forward in life? And yeah, do you think that's a
I don't know,
possibility?
I think you've got a good point there. Like me and my cousin were talking. I think it was yesterday, and we were talking about how like Joe Rogan's referenced this, how it seems like the most creative people and like the people that are kind of driven to do things and become like the best version of themselves. It seems like they all have something in common, and that is like childhood trauma in a sense, or some sort of trauma early on in their life. And it seems like there's a real benefit to suffering early on in your life, because it can make you become more driven, or can develop you in more like in a more self-aware way. Um, but I still think those things can happen even if you have a good childhood, as
Yeah.
long as you're taught. As long as you're taught like there is a right path to take, and that path will eventually have suffering on it.
Mhm.
But I do know what you mean. Like if you're brought up in a world where everything should be positive, and then you get thrown into the real life when you turn like into an adult, it might overwhelm you when you do get those negative experiences. But I think you can only, I think if, like we've said, I think we've referenced it in the past, if you teach your kids to take on voluntary suffering, such as like training hard in jiu-jitsu or like going on fucking long distance runs or just like anything that's physically exerting or like mentally stimulating in like a negative way in the moment, obviously then it has the benefits afterwards that you get pleasure from. I think if you make your child understand that, then they won't get overwhelmed by the negative experiences.
Yeah, so you brought up an important point there, which is so I initially spoke about how happiness could be viewed as short-term pleasure, hedonism type of thing, but there's a different form of happiness, which, you know, I'm not entirely sure if happiness is the most accurate word for it, but the satisfaction and fulfillment you feel after doing something difficult and, reaping some reward from that. Um, you could say that's happiness. It certainly, I guess, feels like happiness at points during the progression through the difficulty towards the reward. But yeah, there's a difference there between. I feel like there is a difference between satisfaction and fulfillment and feeling meaning compared to simply pure happiness, bliss, joyfulness, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, how would you define happiness just in like a single statement? Like, do you have like a? I know it's a difficult thing to answer, but do you have like kind of like a statement that you would describe happiness as? Although, in my opinion, it probably be very much like context dependent. But like,
Yeah.
do you have like an answer for that?
Well, I think I think it is context dependent, and do I have a specific answer to that? I'm not sure. I have different ideas in different contexts. So I've laid out the idea. One might be hedonistic pleasure, which it might not be from pursuing pure hedonism but it will come in moments to you. You just feel positive emotion. You feel happy. You feel like joyful, that type of thing, enthusiasm, um, just a lot of positive emotion in the absence of negative emotion.
Mm.
Um, and so that's one definition of happiness. And before I kind of talk about different definitions of it, another point I wanted to make about that form of happiness, even if it's not in the form of pursuing pure hedonism, is I do somewhat question how much you actually have control over feeling that kind of pure sense of joy and happiness in the moment. I feel like it's quite a fleeting thing, and
Right.
I feel like it will be more sustainable and come in a better way if maybe you're more focused on um pursuing meaningful goals, and we can get into exactly what meaningful goal will be. But I think purely pursuing happiness is sort of um
Quickest way to not be happy, almost.
yeah, if you're so attached to the idea of being happy, and if feeling unhappy makes you unhappy, like if you don't really care whether you feel like that joyful or not, you're just content and fulfilled pursuing your goals, then you could argue that you kind of feel happy all the time even when you're not happy. And obviously that doesn't really make sense as a sentence, but if you take into
Mm.
account the different definitions of the word you could use, then I think that's a possibility.
Yeah,
um,
no, I know what you mean. Do you think? I don't know if they've been able to do it yet or not, or if we even could. Do you think we're able to, or in the future we'll be able to almost measure happiness through like brain scans? Like, is it something that can or could be measured by like the chemical balance that you have in your brain at that specific moment?
Yeah, dopamine
Or do you,
levels, serotonin levels, oxytocin levels, that sort of
right?
thing. Well, I do wonder about this, and in moments, the way I've come to understand a lot of these brain chemistry type things is that you kind of always tend towards baseline. Like with dopamine, for example, when you get a boost of dopamine, you get an equal or maybe even larger dip below the baseline of dopamine afterwards. So we're kind of, in moments when I feel like if you were to reduce happiness to the neurochemistry, then it's somewhat of a zero-sum game. And I feel like I don't know. So I don't know. I don't know if you can directly measure it through the level of chemicals in the brain, because I think it's not just the levels of the chemicals in the brain, but I think it's also the way the brain is actually wired itself. There's there was this Andrew Huberman podcast I was listening to, and it sort of made the point that the reason SSRIs work, so SSRIs boost
Well,
serotonin in some way, or increase uptake of serotonin, something.
selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
Yeah, so I guess that means serotonin is not reuptaked, whatever that means.
Yeah,
But
that's
there's more.
he explained it and I understood what he said, but the name's just confusing me because
Yeah,
it sounds like the wrong way
yeah.
around.
So basically, the point is that there's more serotonin floating around in the system, but but it actually takes weeks for it to work. So even though instantly after taking it the serotonin rises, it's actually the changes
Right.
in the brain due to having that higher serotonin for a period of time, which is what cures the depression, or treats the depression. So
Yeah.
listen to that kind of made me think it's not reducible to simply the levels of the chemicals, but the wiring of the brain, regardless of the chemicals which are most active, also has a strong part to play.
So you're saying the physical layout almost of the brain has an influence on it, not just the level of chemicals that are there. Do you also think possibly like in like a more non-physical way that your mindset can have a degree of like how you experience happiness? Like for example, Huberman talks about how when you smoke a cigarette, like your dopamine increases, and that's why you get that. Like, that's part of why you're addicted to it. But like for me, when I've had a cigarette before, it's not like made me instantly happy, even though there's definitely a dopamine hit in my body. Like dopamine is definitely increasing my body, but as soon as I've had it, I'm not like, oh my god, I'm so happy. Maybe I do get a relaxed feeling, but I
Yeah,
feel
it
like your
does.
mindset.
Yeah. I feel the same thing. Like if I don't know, do something hedonistic, like I were to play, like I wanted to play a video game, and I
Yeah,
fulfilled that urge, I wouldn't necessarily say I really feel happy after doing that, or even during doing that. It's almost just scratching an itch when it's purely this dopaminergic thing. But the thing, so you asked the question there, do I think it's purely a physical thing, or do I think it's a mindset? Well, I think both, because I think your mindset, it's absolutely proven that your mindset changes your neurochemistry, and your mindset can change the wiring of your brain. Um, so yeah, I guess both are true. If you think in a certain way, if you have a positive mindset, which you can, we have this ability as humans, this like top down control, where we can actively, consciously think things, and try to, and that for example boosts dopamine. Um, so I guess the point I'm trying to make is that through cultivating a certain mindset, you can change your neurochemistry, and if you do that many times, then you strengthen those circuits, and you're actually changing the structure of your brain as well.
yeah,
So yeah, to that question, yeah, both. It's a physical thing and a mindset thing, but those two things are intertwined from my understanding of the neurochemistry.
yeah, yeah. I remember maybe like a year ago or longer, I was listening to a podcast, and the discussion was kind of about there's that saying, mind over matter. Like your mindset can overcome like the physical surroundings almost. This guy was kind of saying like your mind. He believes your mind and body, although are regarded as separate things, he believes that they are literally one. Because if you have like a physical touch on your hand, although your mind feels that and it can kind of seem like a different system, because it's like instantly in your mind, those two things are the same thing, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like the stimulus there is there physically, and then it's instantly in your mind. So like you can't necessarily say that they're two separate like systems. They are like you were saying, they are so intertwined that they have to be like regarded as one almost.
Yeah.
And I think that, like that you said, I think it applies to like the dopamine system and like happiness maybe.
Yeah, well, something else I learned from Andrew Huberman was he spoke about this. They've done experiments on what makes people quit. So they can measure these neurochemicals running around the system, and basically people quit in physically demanding activity. There are some, like for example, if you're lifting heavy weights, it's like your muscles fatigue and your muscles can't physically do the movement. But for example, long endurance things, although there's no definite stop point at which your muscles can no longer go further. But what happens is, in terms of the neurochemistry, when people quit, is that adrenaline goes up, and once adrenaline reaches a certain level, or epinephrine, as it's also called, reaches a certain level, that's what makes you quit. But
When it reaches
dopamine,
a certain level.
yeah, when it reaches a certain high enough level, you'll be like, I'm done. But
Okay.
but dopamine suppresses adrenaline back down. So basically, the example he talks about is a guy like David Goggins. Like you talk about the way he speaks, where he cultivates so much like motivation through the way he speaks about the pain being the objective.
Yeah.
Like the whole mindset of David Goggins is he's cultivating dopamine, he's boosting dopamine in his brain, which allows him to push extremely hard physically because the dopamine, on a neurochemical level, the dopamine is suppressing the adrenaline and allowing you to keep going for longer.
Wow. But that's kind of amazing to be fair.
Yeah.
It's such a simple thing, but it kind of just explains exactly not obviously it's not the only factor, but it explains exactly why David Goggins is so successful in these long endurance like feats.
Yeah, we've gone slightly off topic there though.
We have,
But
yeah.
actually, so we're planning on doing the next episode like all specifically about the dopamine system. So
Yeah.
yeah, we can go deeper into that sort of thing next time. But yeah,
But
I
back to
guess
happiness.
back to happiness. So where were we? So an important thing about happiness is, the attention I see. So we've laid out how hedonism probably isn't the way to go, but there is an aspect of happiness which I wouldn't consider hedonism, but it still can somewhat go in consequence to really pursuing goals. And it comes from the idea that desire is suffering. It's like a fundamental Buddhist idea. And basically, when you have a desire, you have a goal of any sort, that until that goal is achieved, there will be suffering. So the Buddhist philosophy on it, and the philosophy of through like meditation and stuff, is that you're able to let go of your desire, let go of your attachment, and through this you can find contentment, which could be another definition of happiness, to be free from longing, free from desire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Free from
What do you think about that as a definition of happiness?
suffering. I think it's I think it is a definition of happiness that I think would work. That I think it's probably, from what I've heard of like the different definitions, that might be the best one I've heard so far, because it's like happiness to me is, it's not necessarily something that can be described, but it can definitely be described as being in a state where there's no negative emotion or feeling. And like, although, as like the Buddha said, like attachment is maybe the root cause of suffering, when you're in a like when you're in the moment of having achieved a goal and you're enjoying the thing that you were longing for, the attachment is gone because you're in that moment and you achieved it. So there's no attachment there. So you are happy because the attachment's gone, so the suffering's gone, and you're happy in that moment. And then but then it fleets away, which is kind of a good thing, I think. But yeah, but I do have a bit of a problem, possibly with the fact that monks are trying to, not monks as individuals, but the idea that you should try and become content with not being attached to anything, or trying to not be attached to anything, because that doesn't seem to be a motivating factor for success.
Yeah, there's a tension between this philosophy and aiming towards being successful, to let go, so I'll lay out a circumstance which I think could optimize happiness in this way. So you think, yeah, this is the way I want to live my life. I want to optimize for this sort of happiness. So that will involve letting go of desire that causes you suffering. So you'll let go of your desire to maybe achieve massive goals, which you don't know if you're able to achieve. You'll kind of give up your attachment to being successful, your attachment to social status, your attachment to the way other people think of you, and maybe some of this stuff will be positive. But I think you look at the life of that person, they may actually live a happier life. So in this point, I'm not trying to contend that that's a happier way to live, but the point, kind of the idea that brought me to this episode, wanting to do this episode, was the idea that this person who aims for happiness their entire life and they live a happy life, is that actually a worse life than someone who aims for, let's say, greatness in their life? Do you have any initial thoughts on
that? I don't know if you could like definitively say it would be a better or a worse life, because the two different individuals, the way they would measure their life as better or worse is from their own bias standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And if the person who is desiring happiness and like contentment with material possessions and other desires, they will measure how good their life is based on contentment, whereas the person who desires success and is willing to sacrifice short-term happiness for that, they'll be measuring it on that basis.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely comes back down to like an individual's viewpoint on how one should live their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I guess that would be the answer, but I'll ask you personally, as an individual, what do you think is more important? Because it's easy enough to say, like, it's up to the individual to decide, but
yeah,
from your subjective perspective, do you think it's worth it? Do you think that extra suffering is worth the extra achievement?
I think I would initially say no, personally, but I do know and I've seen the benefits of that suffering for longer term greatness in like other people, and I've seen it like in examples of myself in like on a smaller scale just in my past years. I think it's just difficult because the sacrificing the now for the future is it's just a difficult road to take. So you just, as a human myself, you want to be hedonistic and you want to have this short term pleasure, because who knows if you're going to last that long to even enjoy the greatness. But I think as I've gotten older, I'd definitely say there's certain things I would sacrifice for the future. I don't know if I'd go as far to like want to be like an entrepreneur who starts the first 10 years of their adult life working 80 to 100 hours a week, but on like a smaller scale, like I definitely want to make sure I still exercise weekly, not maybe not daily, but like enough times a week so I'm healthy when I'm older and I'm still able to move when I'm like 80. Like they're the sort of things that matter most to me at the moment. Like having longevity in my life is one thing that I would like really value, and like, I want to be able to like physically play with my grandkids rather than just be stuck in a chair with a bad back. Like that's one of the things that matters to me at the moment.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
Um, you know, I the thing I think about is, I don't know, I don't know if I believe it's actually possible to be entirely content through whichever means by letting go of what you want. And perhaps that's just from my current perspective where I haven't gone further enough down that kind of route to really realize. But I kind of think the suffering of having desires and wants, um, the longing to live a certain way, or to have certain things, maybe to some extent you can let go of them and they'll make you happier. But
Mm,
I'm not too sure. I'd say I'd lean to the side of it is worth it, and whether I'll end up acting that out to the full extent in my own life, I'm not entirely sure. But trying to look at this from a purely like kind of outside from a philosophical point of view, like what is the correct thing to do, I do kind of think that aiming for greatness to achieve your potential, to make the absolute most of yourself that you can be, is the more noble path, rather than
yeah,
letting go of what you want.
yeah,
It's I'm not entirely sure though. It's something that I think about, and I'm not too sure, and it's still something I'm trying to figure out, which is, kind of partly why I wanted to do the episode, so I could
yeah.
think about
I
it.
mean, one thing that I've seen like a bit of a dichotomy between is, Alan Watts, that kind of philosophical speaker.
Mhm.
I think he might be dead now, but yes, you just see clips of him online. Well, I do anyway, like every now and then. And I can't remember the word for word, but like one of the quotes or sayings I heard him say was kind of like it was along the lines of, like, the gist of it was like letting go of like letting go of like desires and like letting go of expectations of what life should be, and kind of just enjoying the fact that you're alive and like living in the moment. And to me, it seems so profound, because like it's a true thing that we should all be. It would be great if everyone in the world was able to kind of literally just take a breath and then be like, wow, I'm alive right now. This is amazing. And I think that's a good thing. But when I thought about that, it kind of made me think that's such a short term way of thinking in the moment. Does it sort of have the risk of sacrificing the future? But when I thought about who was saying it, Alan Watts, he definitely has been disciplined enough to work hard and like create these like books and teachings that's influenced the whole world, while having this like contentment. And it seems like maybe there is like a hybrid way of doing it where you're sacrificing desires, but you're also trying to achieve contentment at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perhaps it's you're sacrificing desires, but it's in service of the higher goal.
Yeah.
Um,
So he's not gone as far just to be a monk and only focus on him as an individual being happy. He's doing that as well as creating this massive collection of work that's influencing other people and showing his greatness at the same time.
Alan Watts, I just checked this because I thought it was true. He is dead, and he died. I just read that. I thought it was he died due to a heart condition. It said there, but it was related to his alcoholism. He
Oh,
was an
oh, okay.
alcoholic, and yeah, he died from being an alcoholic, which I guess is kind of ironic considering his teachings.
Yeah.
And maybe to some extent it does show that it is difficult to really find that contentment in the moment. If
Mm,
you optimizing for the present moment, then it might be difficult for that to be a sustainable thing over time. Whereas if you're optimizing for the future, it seems as if there's a certain stability in that, because even if you don't feel good in the present moment, it's almost beside the point. And
yeah.
perhaps it links back to the neurochemistry. If your highest goal is to feel good in the moment and you don't feel good in the moment, then this will create kind of a negative feedback loop where you feel bad because you feel unhappy, and then you feel less happy because you're feeling bad about being unhappy. That kind of feedback loop. Whereas
Yeah.
you won't get into that if you're focused on long-term goals, and you have this more um as Nietzsche would put it, having a unifying life goal. Like if you don't feel good on a day to day, then okay, I don't feel happy, but I kind of completely accept that. But
Mm,
I say that, but that's kind of the idea of meditation. It's not about forcing yourself to feel a certain way. It's about letting go of the attachment to needing things to be a certain way. So you're completely accepting of that in the moment. That's also like a stoic kind of way of thinking. You, to the
yeah.
extent that you can't control your mind, you can control how you react to how you feel. And
Yeah.
there's a certain level of detachment that is important there. So perhaps, yeah, that's an important point for both your short-term well-being and your long-term goals, having a certain level of detachment from the way you feel in the present moment.
Yeah.
I think focusing so much on happiness, whatever that means, focusing so much on that kind of does attach you to the way you're feeling in the present moment. And in a way, in a different definition, focusing on happiness will make you feel less happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's difficult. I remember, I think it was Peterson talking about what is the meaning of life, and like the common answer between a lot of people would be happiness. And then he talks about how and why he thinks it should be suffering. I think we might have talked about this in the past, I'm not too sure, but like he says something along the lines of, if you give life meaning only when you're happy, because of the um because of the way life is, you will inevitably experience suffering. And if you're experiencing suffering in that moment, there is no meaning in your life when you're suffering. Whereas if you kind of hold suffering as the meaning of life, even when you're happy, because you're happy, you'll be happy.
Yeah.
But when you're suffering, your life still has meaning. So it gives you a better sense of, I don't know what better sense it would give you, but it gives your life more meaning. But I feel like it does something deeper than that almost.
Yeah, I feel like it kind of depends how you define meaning, because to me, meaning would be the most fundamental thing. Um, so you should strive for meaning, and in some sense that will lead to fulfillment. But even those two are probably different. I think meaning is probably a more accurate way of putting it. So to
Yeah,
aim for meaning is more important than aiming for happiness. And yeah, a big reason why I kind of started to think this way, where happiness isn't the most important thing to aim for in life, is because of learning from Jordan Peterson and listening to him. Because he kind of talks about how life is tragic, and the idea that you're going to be happy all the time, as you said, if that's the way you judge things, whenever you're not happy, it means your life doesn't have meaning.
mhm,
But I guess it comes back to, if your meaning is attached to a unifying life goal, then your life will have meaning despite the suffering. And I
yeah,
guess Jordan Peterson links that into responsibility. And I think an important point about that is adopting more responsibility won't make you happy, won't make you happier. And a lot of people associate freedom with happiness, whereas responsibility a lot of time takes away your freedom, but it does it in service of meaning.
Yeah,
And I think swapping out um, happiness for meaning and freedom for responsibility is probably a more noble path. So yeah, that's a big reason why I've ended up kind of leaning to the side of happiness shouldn't be prioritized for.
yeah. It's interesting that we talk about freedom and like meaning and happiness. Jocko Willink has a book called Discipline Equals Freedom, and it's kind of based on the premise that almost the more freedom you take away from your life by being disciplined and completing the tasks that you know you need to complete, that gives you more freedom. He like gives like specific examples that like make sense, and like I think he's right in his belief that discipline does equal freedom. And it kind of references, it kind of leads into what you're saying about if you have a unifying life goal, although it seems like it takes away freedom from your life because you have to sacrifice certain things to try and achieve that goal, you could argue it gives you more freedom in terms of like your mind. Like if you know you're working towards something that's meaningful, you're going to be kind of more, I was going to say more happy, but your life will have more meaning and you'll feel more fulfilled.
Mm.
And that doesn't seem like that doesn't necessarily feel like a tangible freedom, but the freedom of the mind from like neuroticism because you don't feel like your life's going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely something that maybe should be valued.
Yeah, it's like by sacrificing the freedom to, let's say, do whatever you want because you've taken up a responsibility that you need to fulfill. By sacrificing that type of freedom, you gain freedom from the need to feel good in every single moment because you you feel good regardless of whether you feel happy or not because
Yeah,
you're on the right path. So by in a weird, a paradoxical way, perhaps by taking on like a practical restricting your freedom practically, you gain freedom like mentally or spiritually in a way.
yeah, yeah. I think the spiritual would be like the best way to describe it almost. But like saying that to kind of argue like another point of view, we said well, I think you said and I said it as well, like people say what's the meaning of life? Is it possibly happiness or suffering? Could there be another point of view where there almost is no meaning to life apart from just living? Like,
Yeah.
why does there have to be some sort of like state of being that needs to be achieved for life to have meaning? Can we not simply just live life and there'll be suffering, there'll be happiness, there'll be sacrifice, there won't be sacrifice? Is there possibly a risk of creating dissatisfaction when you put some meaning on life because maybe you won't be able to achieve it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I feel like that presents maybe the argument for the meditation side of things in the best possible way.
Yeah,
Because, but like the person who I've heard explain this the best was Sam Harris. And I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, but it's like we're always putting off our our needs to be we're always putting off being happy because we think when we get this next thing we'll be happy or like that's the fundamental thing. But if we can, but through meditation, he says we can let go of that need for things to be different, to be happy, and then
right.
any thought of discontent is just kind of another layer of this conscious experience, which is ultimately um satisfactory in and of itself if you're able to let go of that attachment.
Yeah.
But
Is it does
yeah, go on.
but does the satisfactory part of it kind of come from the fact that you're just satisfied with being alive, and with being alive comes suffering and these other things?
Yeah, Yeah,
Is
I
that
guess
would you say that's the main like that's the main kind of point of view for that way of thinking? Is that you're just happy to be alive almost? Not happy to be alive, but your meaning to life is the fact that you have life.
I think the key point is letting go of attachment and letting go of the need for things to be different. And in the
Right.
absence of both of those things, there's nothing left but a state of contentment because there's no need for anything to be different. And as I said, any thought that comes up which interferes with that is just another aspect of your existence, which doesn't need to be different in order for you to be content. Um, but I do think so. So there's that idea, but I do think it's hard because I believe that, but I also believe that your life needs a direction. Like you can't just sit in this state of contentment all the time. I don't believe that's a good life. Maybe we should all spend far more time than we do sitting in the state of contentment. But I do also think that there needs to be some sort of unifying life goal, as Nietzsche would put it,
Mm.
a direction to your life, a a purpose underlying your existence, as well as the ability to feel completely content. But there is definitely a contradiction there because you need to feel because on one hand it's about being completely free of your wanting for things to be different, and on the other hand for there to be something to strive for there needs to
Yeah.
be some change that you're pursuing.
Yeah.
So there's a fundamental tension between those two ideas, but
I think they could possibly work in conjunction with each other. That if you let go of expectations and you're trying to pursue contentment, I think alongside that you can also try and pursue achievement. I think the difference between having like the I think the difference would be between trying to achieve stuff and forgetting about contentment because that's a driving because your driving factor is achievement and you don't want contentment to get in the way of that. I do think contentment and achievement can work alongside each other. The difference would just be between those two is that you wouldn't be dissatisfied if you don't get to a certain level of achievement.
yeah,
But I still like Sam Harris, in my opinion, would be a great example of that. Like he is probably very content with his life because he meditates on a daily basis, but he still has these huge huge achievements like with his books, his work, and like his podcast and all these other things. But I feel like he would still be content even if he didn't achieve those things because he's just letting go of expectations. But that because you let go of expectations, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to let go of the desire to push forward.
yeah, yeah. I think those two things can coexist. It's like you do the things you do because you believe it's the proper way to live, but that's
Yeah,
not to say that you have any dissatisfaction with the present moment. The present moment is entirely, perhaps the present moment can be entirely satisfactory in and of itself, but you can still be working towards a better future. And perhaps
yeah,
that even adds to it that the striving towards a better future, even if that set point that you're aiming for, it doesn't currently exist. The fact that you're moving towards that in the present moment,
yeah.
yeah, maybe
It
that's
links
it.
in. I think it links back into what we said a few episodes ago. How instead of falling in love with the end goal, falling in love with the process, and that being what gives you happiness, is probably the best route to take.
Yeah,
And I feel like that can come along with having a sense of achievement that you want to have, but letting go of the expectations.
yeah,
I think that kind of those two things are pretty much the same thing in my mind.
yeah. It does seem that they actually work quite nicely together there. If you can be completely content in the present moment without being necessarily content in the future, but the fact you're working towards a better future makes the present moment entirely content. But
Yeah,
but yeah, even having said that, I do think there is an aspect of as you I think you mentioned before that like the most successful people often are the ones that suffer the most. And I do think having a certain deep dissatisfaction and need to be different does unlock another drive, which perhaps you don't necessarily need, but I think it, I don't think it entirely works out perfectly there where you can get the absolute best of both worlds. I think there is a bit of a tension there. And for me, I do think I still slightly lean towards, I think it's extremely important to try and find that feeling of contentment in your life. But I do still lean towards the fact that when there is conflict, the additional suffering and lack of contentment for the sake of greater self-actualization is actually worth it.
Yeah.
Like I lean on that side of the fence.
Yeah, that's a fair point of view.
I've got to run off, so should we wrap up
Yeah.
here? Seems like a
Yeah.
reasonable convenient point.
I think we got most of what we want to talk about out
Yeah,
there.
it is a good episode, quite condensed one, but I feel like we did really get to the heart of what we were trying to talk about there.
Yeah.
And we touched on the dopamine system there.
We'll definitely dive into that.
Yeah, so next episode, I think we're going to do specifically about the dopamine system. So yeah, it should be good. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for listening. It is 31 past 12 p.m. See you guys next time. Check us out on Spotify. Like, subscribe, all that shit. Thank you, Pete, and we'll see to you soon.
See you in a bit.
Bye.